Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about Hungarian true crime cases, and my name is Tímea, and today's case is gonna be yet another, kind of brutal crime that involves poisoning and butchering of a body, and I just cannot seem to find something less brutal. I know I've been keep saying that I just want to do something lighthearted for once, but I just cannot seem to do that. Before we start, I wanted to say that I realize that everybody who has my email address with this channel gets my videos in their recommended on YouTube. So if you are a former university teacher of mine, let me know that you're watching and you are my biggest fan, okay? There is no shame in that. And by the way, over the weekend I had the best idea ever. You know, like how there are mukbang and true crime and ASMR and true crime and makeup and true crime, blah blah blah. And I was thinking about how could I turn this to my own style. And I figured I could do watercolor illustration and true crime. I like painting a lot, and I just have to figure out how to film the paper and myself at the same time, how to make it interesting. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea at all? And help me figure out how to do it in case you have any ideas. And I just wanted to show you a few of my recent paintings that I'm kind of proud of. There's this one. I was just doing some fruit illustrations, and I really would like to work with this and become a full-time illustrator, but that's not an easy thing to do. I don't know how to break into the market. Do you know how to do it? Should I do like on Fiverr? And this one is a cake. I like pancakes so much. I really like this. I think it turned out kind of good. And I really would like to try myself in kids' book illustrations. I think I would do so well because I love fairy tales. Okay, anyway, let's get started. As I said, today's video is going to involve the murder of an underage person and poisoning, butchering of a body, and some graphic descriptions. I'm also going to put some kind of fucked up pictures. So if you don't want to see the pictures, you can just skip through that. I'm gonna try to put some timestamps if I don't forget. So let's get right into it. Today's story takes place back in 1958 in the city of Balaton. Hungary does not have a sea, but we have this long ass lake. It's very narrow and very long, as you can see in the map, and this is the #1 vacation spot for Hungarians. I'm going there at the end of this week. It just so happened that a woman called Kovács Jenőné on the 4th of August in 1958 brought her laundry basket to wash in the lake behind the fisherman's inn, and there was some reeds at this area. So as she was washing, she noticed a metal canister between the reeds, and a metal canister is kind of a good and useful thing to have around, so she wanted to fish it out of the lake to store wine mush in it. But she wasn't able to bring out the canister all by herself, so she called her son to help her out. And her son went inside the water between the reeds and tried to pull it out, like lift it out between the reeds. However, the canister was too heavy and a lot of people walking around went there to help them. And when they opened the canister, a foul, terrible smell drenched the entire area. And they saw a piece of rotten meat or flesh hanging out of the opening of the canister. So then they just stuffed it back in, they closed with the lid, and they just wanted to leave it there. They assumed it must have been maybe pork or horse meat for some odd reason. I don't know, if I came across a metal canister with rotten meat inside, it would not be my first idea that it was animal meat. Do not forget that in the 50s, 60s, like, we had communism. Meat was scarce. It wasn't like something that you have all the time. It was a luxury. So why would somebody stuff the remains of a dead animal in the canister and dump it in the lake? But okay, maybe they just did not want to believe that it could have been a person. However, walking right there and then was a volunteer policeman who got suspicious of this, as he should have, and he alerted the police about this finding. The police came by and they took the canister back to the police station where they opened it. And what was inside was fucked up. I'm also going to show you some pictures, so if you don't want to see, then look away, but I recommend that you listen to it so that you know what happened. In this canister, they found a left femur bone cut into 2 equal-sized pieces, 2 22 centimeter long pieces. And they also found the right femur, which was cut into a 20 and a 24 centimeter long piece. They also found a 68 centimeter long piece of meat that still had the skin, the fat, and the muscle attached to it. Not only that, they also found the whole left breast and a navel and several pieces of flesh from the left thigh, the front of the thigh part, and the buttocks, as well as an entire piece of the abdomen, the loin, and the lower back. So like a whole person, which looked a lot more like what a butcher's counter would look, to be honest. The police called in a forensic medic who was able to confirm that this was indeed the remains of a woman. And the forensic medic also identified that this person was a woman anywhere between the ages of 20 to 40, most likely, give or take a couple of years, that she has not given birth, that she had tan skin and light brown or blondish hair, and she was around 170 centimeters tall and somewhat overweight. And they also said that the pieces of the body was cut with a precision of either a surgeon or a butcher. Now, it is kind of weird how butchers and surgeons have so much in common, and I do not know how it makes me feel. I don't know if it makes me feel good about butchers or bad about surgeons. Not to mention that each piece of this body was sewn together with medical stitching string. I think that's the word, stitching string or stitching yarn. I'm not sure, but you know what I mean. But they weren't stitched together tightly, as if like a weird human quilt would be. It was just a light single stitch between each of the pieces to keep them all together. And the police was theorizing that it could have been to keep the pieces together, so if the canister opens in the lake, they wouldn't drift apart, they would be in one piece. And hoping that if it's one piece, it would be too heavy to float on top of the water. But obviously that's not what happens in the case of a corpse. Eventually they rise to the top of the water regardless. The police was able to identify that this medical string was indeed produced in a single factory in Budapest, and it was not produced anywhere else. And they also confirmed with the veterinary college to see if they used the same kind of string. And this college confirmed that yes, we use the same string, but we do not use the same knot that you had on this piece. So now the police was sure that it was a doctor and not a vet for some reason, so they were able to narrow down their suspect. But not only that, 3 days later, on the 7th of August, a left hand was found in a plastic bag near a public restroom on the then called Mark Square, which is now called the Nyugati Square in Budapest. So there was a public restroom, and next to the men's restroom somebody found this left hand that did not have fingernails anymore. And it was confirmed that the nails have soaked off, like in water. I didn't know that you can soak in water so long that your nails fall out. Like, I will not take a long bath anymore. They took it to the Medical University of Budapest, where they made an X-ray on this hand that was able to confirm that it was a woman's hand, and it was chopped off with perfect precision, as if a surgeon did it. So even though there was no DNA then, they were able to confirm that it was most likely the same person that was found in Balaton, quite a bit further away. But with all of this, the head was not found. More on that later. The police wanted to make sure that they have found every piece of the body. They were searching for the head as well. So they took a 200-meter long fishing net and they tried to comb through the entire lake. But nothing else came up. I guess they just caught a whole lot of fish. The police had to find the victim's identity as well as a suspect. So they asked around in all of the surrounding villages and towns and big cities and collected all of the missing girls' and women's names. However, to no avail. None of the missing persons' descriptions matched the description of this victim. Luckily, on the 16th of August, so about 2 weeks after the discovery of the body, the police was able to produce 4 witnesses. And these 4 witnesses testified that they had sighted a man driving a car, a Fiat Topolino type car, and this man was driving in the direction of Budapest on the main road. And then he took a U-turn just a couple of 100 meters later and started going in the direction of Keszthely, which was the edge, the very end of Balaton. And these witnesses remembered this very well because of this strange U-turn and the speeding and the type of the car. Not to mention that not everybody owned a car like they do now, so you were probably a little bit more likely to remember if you saw a car, especially if it was speeding and taking odd turns. The witnesses even claimed to remember the license plate number. Unfortunately, they remembered it wrong, so that was not going to help the police. Luckily, the police was still able to narrow down the people that owned this type of car in the area, and they found a 60-year-old district doctor called Dr. Schusser Frigyes. I'm going to refer to him as mostly just the doctor to keep it easy for you because his name is kind of hard. I think I forgot to mention that the victim was killed 1 to 2 days before the discovery in the canister. And the doctor looked like a very good suspect to the police, just because a couple of weeks before the alleged murder, he had moved from the city of Nagykanizsa to the town/village of Pacsa. And this doctor had a 17-year-old stepdaughter called Tóth Pál Jolán. So her name was Jolán. And Jolán's mother was the doctor's second wife, who was called Franyó Anna. And they, the doctor and Anna together, had a son as well, but Jolán was only the stepdaughter to the doctor. And she fit the description of their body perfectly. She was about 170 centimeters tall, she was somewhat overweight, she had tan skin and lightish brown/blonde hair. And nobody had seen her for a while now. Unfortunately, this lead that the doctor could have been the murderer and Jolán could have been the victim was entirely dismissed by the police based on one single information that they had. And this information was that on the 26th of August, so 22 days after the body was discovered, Jolán allegedly moved her permanent address from the city of Pacsa to Budapest. And she even had her signature on this form, and the police had this record. So they figured that if there was this document with her name that she signed in person, then she was alive and she could not have been the victim, therefore the doctor could not have been the murderer. But that was unfortunately a fraudulent document. But yeah, just in a second, I'm gonna talk about that too. And the police entirely dismissed this lead because of this tiny clue. And it wasn't until the 20th of September, about a month later, that the police even heard the doctor's name again. That was when the doctor was found dead in a hotel room, in a hotel called Aranybárány, I believe, in the city of Zalaegerszeg. So you can see this case takes place all over the country, over several cities and towns. And he had committed suicide by overdosing on injectable medicine. He had injected in himself 32 ampoules of morphine, 14 ampoules of Damapon, 2 ampoules of Sevanol, and 3 ampoules of Dometrine. And according to the forensic doctor, this amount of medicine would have been enough to kill 6 people. But the doctor did not die. He actually stayed alive for 5 more days until he died of complications of pneumonia that was indirectly caused by the overdosing. And I feel like in my videos, people always survive for way longer than they physically should be able to. But either way, he died in the hospital of Zalaegerszeg. So his suicide put him back into the police's radar. Now he looked extremely suspicious. So the police called in the second wife, Anna, and the mother of Jolán, to talk about the doctor. She said that she knew that her husband, the doctor, and her daughter had an affair. Now let's stop there for a second. Okay, it wasn't incest because they were not blood relatives. But isn't it kind of fucked up that your daughter and your husband are fucking? Not to mention that Jolán was 17 and the doctor was 60. So obviously, as soon as Anna figured this out, she wanted to separate from him and she moved away from the family home. And she also wanted to divorce, and she had started the divorce papers, but the doctor refused to sign the divorce papers because he did not want to be involved in the scandals of being a divorced man. Besides, he had a lot to lose. Through further investigation, the police uncovered a whole lot of other things as well. It turned out that the doctor had planned to kill Anna, his wife, before he would have to kill Jolán, his stepdaughter. His plan was to inject them with several ampules of drugs over the course of many days, and that these drugs would just accumulate in their systems before it could be metabolized, and they would die of a slow and terrible overdose. And he had started this course of treatment into his second wife's body, and she actually started getting really sick after a few days. However, she was able to survive because of a surprise visit of her mother, so Jolán's grandmother and the doctor's mother-in-law. She came over to stay there for a couple of days, and therefore the doctor wasn't able to administer the last few doses in the last few days. So Anna was able to survive, but she actually got sick and she had to go to the hospital for further treatment. But she didn't know that it was because of these injectables. And that is what the police theorized about Jolán's death, that she was injected over several days with several doses of morphine and other drugs. And she had talked about feeling sick and weak and lethargic to her friends and family. And the 2 days before her death, she couldn't even leave her house anymore. She was just sick at home until she eventually died on the 29th of July. So a few days after that, on the 2nd of August, the doctor started dismembering her body, and he cut her up into all of those crazy pieces that I talked about in the beginning of the video. And he also decapitated her corpse. Now, what he did to the head is fucked up. He took out a drawer from a dresser in their house, and he laid this head inside the jar. He put a hair comb and a pink hairpin and some flowers next to it. And he went out to a nearby forest and he dug a hole. And he dug this entire drawer with the head inside and then covered it with a 20-kilometer heavy piece of rock on top. Then he stuffed all of the remains into the metal canister, as I talked about in the beginning, and dumped it in the lake Balaton. And as we know, he took the left hand, put it in a plastic bag and went all the way to Budapest just to leave it there next to a public restroom. And the same day of the murder, he started telling the people in the village of Pacsa that Jolán had moved to Budapest and she is not coming back. He also sent a letter to his then still wife, but in the process of divorcing, Anna to come back home because he wanted to start over. He had broken up with her daughter and he just wanted to be with Anna again. So Anna strangely went to visit. I'm not sure if because he also wanted to reconcile or because she just wanted to get her stuff from the house and break it off with him forever. But she indeed went back home, and she found it strange that her daughter was not around. And she kept on asking, "Where is my daughter? Where is Yolan? What happened to her?" And the doctor kept answering that she had left and she is not coming back and you should not go searching for her. So Anna just figured that her daughter was a defector and she had escaped to the West. Now, you might find it weird why a mother would just accept this explanation and not go looking for her daughter or report her missing. Well, that was because it was 1958. People defected all the time. And because if you don't know, in communism you were not allowed to just travel around in Europe. You had to have a governmental permission that would allow you to go to the West once every 4 years with a limited budget, so you would not be able to start a life there. If you escaped, you could not come back home. And this is what happened to some of my family members as well. They had escaped to Germany and they still haven't returned, even so much time after the system change. And the reason why she didn't explicitly ask this from the doctor or talk about this with anyone was because of the secret police. You didn't know who was in the secret police in communism. It could have been your husband, it could have been your best friend, it could have been your nice neighbors. And if you talked about your daughter or your son escaping the country and somebody snitched on you at the secret police, then you would get in trouble. So she just didn't explicitly talk about thinking that her daughter has escaped to the West. And she assumed that the doctor was also not talking about explicitly for the same reason. So that is all that Anna said from before the doctor had committed suicide. But she also mentioned that he had written her a suicide note in which he said a lot of things actually. He explicitly told her not to go searching for Yolan under any circumstances, especially not until this whole frenzy died down and the police wouldn't search in this murder investigation nearby anymore. And he also explicitly stated that he was not involved in the disappearance of Yolan. And then he also hinted that he was very contradicting in this suicide note. And what's fucked up to me is that even in his death, he knew that he was gonna die from overdose. He knew that he was gonna commit suicide. And even in his death note, he still lied. Like, if I know I'm gonna die, I would just come clean and make a confession that yes, I fucking killed a person. I wouldn't be trying to save my ass when I knew it wasn't going to matter to me anymore. But this man was just a fucked up individual and I guess he lied, even on his suicide. So obviously the village is always a step ahead of the police, and there were rumors that the doctor killed Yolan in the city of Balaton. Now I showed you a map that Balaton is on the south coast of Balaton, and Balaton, where the canister was found, is directly across of the lake on the north. And the police was able to confirm that a doctor owned a vacation house in Balaton. However, this doctor was under a different name and different address abroad, so the police wouldn't have been able to confirm that it was Dr. Schusser. However, we can see that the doctor before had done fraudulent police records regarding Yolan's permanent address. Remember? So it wouldn't have been that hard for him to forge this document that the owner of this house in Balaton was another doctor with another name and another address. He could have easily just have an alias or a different identity. Why is this important in the first place? Because of the geographical location of this lake, the wind always blows from the south to the north. And because Balaton is directly across from Balaton, whatever would get loose in Balaton, like a boat, a surfboard, a sailboat, they would always end up across the lake in the reeds of Balaton. So it is entirely possible that if somebody dumped, per se, a metal canister in the lake, by the morning it would travel across the lake and end up in the reeds in Balaton. And the police even contacted the Biological Institute of Tímea nearby, and this institute was able to confirm, based on the bacteria and other aquatic life that got stuck on the canister, that it indeed traveled across the lake from Balaton to Balaton. I find it crazy how much science can show you. It's insane how they were able to specifically locate that part of the lake, even like 70 years ago. It's crazy. Unfortunately, the police was never actually able to confirm that if Dr. Schuster was the one who owned this weekend house in Balaton. And that's because a weekend house is exactly that. You would only go there in summer for a couple of days or weeks, and the permanent local residents of these villages would not be able to remember the names or the faces of the people who only went there a couple of times a year. So nobody was able to identify Dr. Schuster as the owner of that specific weekend house. So this whole information about this weekend house is more just like a legend than a valid piece of evidence. So now we have talked about who could be the killer and who could be the victim, and how the killer could have killed this victim, and how he would get rid of the body. But what would have been his motive, his reasoning to all of this? Now remember that I said that Anna, the wife, wanted to divorce from the doctor, and he refused because he didn't want to be involved in the scandal. In the 50s, it was very scandalous to be divorced. But not only that, he would have also lost half of his possessions with the divorce, and his job as a doctor would have also been jeopardized. I'm not sure if he would have been fired directly as the cause of a divorce. I do not think so. But I think his reputation would have gone sour, and people wouldn't want to go to a divorced man as a doctor. So he would eventually have to resign. I'm not sure, but he had this fear of losing his job. But most of all, he did not want anybody to know that he was fucking his stepdaughter, who was a 17-year-old little girl. In Hungary, the age of consent is 12, which is the lowest in Europe. So if you have sex with anyone older than 12, you are not considered a pedophile, which you should be. Now, I deliberately did not tell you another piece of information because I wanted to keep it last, to show you how suspicious this doctor really is. Now, in his suicide note that I mentioned earlier, he said that he killed himself because he was in constant suffering and pain and agony because he was in the final stages of prostate cancer. However, when his body was taken for an autopsy, it showed that he not only didn't have a fatal disease like cancer, he was entirely healthy and strong. He did not have any reason to kill himself, as for a fatal disease. On top of that, when the police searched his house, they found everything that he could have used for the murder and the dismembering of Yolan's body. They had found the medical injection needles. Of course, he was a doctor. They found the several empty ampoules that only he as a doctor would have access to, but he had a few too many of them for some reason. They had found medical blades, knives, saws for sawing bones, and they had found the same medical string and stitching needles. So Yeah, you can write it off as that he was a doctor and he owned these, but this many? And in his house and not in his workplace? And so many empty ampules? Not to even mention that they had found several of the same type metal canister that the body was also found in. Now we have discussed all of the facts and all of the theories, but you may still have a few questions. How was he able to administer so many injections into these two women's bodies and that one of them would even die? There are two possible answers to that. First of all, it is possible that he had administered the injections in their sleep and they wouldn't wake up to it, which is possible. He could have used some kind of like numbing agent or knocked them out with chloroform, I don't know. But if he didn't use anything to numb the pain, I find it less likely that he did that in their sleep. Because now injection needles are so thin, you don't feel anything. But imagine 70 years ago, I swear an injection needle was like this thick. So if you got injected, it would have hurt a lot more, and even in my sleep I would wake up to that. It's like a bee sting. And the other answer is that him being a licensed doctor plus their family member, he was able to convince these women that for some reason they needed these certain injections. Maybe he told them that it was vitamins or some medicine that would help them, and they consented to the treatment without knowing that they were actually getting fatal amounts of morphine injected in their bloodstream. Now, because the doctor had a constant access to morphine, and as you can see, he loved administering morphine to people, his wife, his stepdaughter, and then to himself, there is a possibility that he could have been morphine addicted himself, what we used to call in Hungarian a morfinista. I don't know if you say morphinist in English to describe someone who is addicted to morphine. Why does this information even matter? Like, there's no way to prove this 60, 70 years after the murder, and why does it even matter in the first place? Well, back in communism, if somebody committed a brutal crime, the police and the media would be sure to present this person as a deranged anti-communist. And anti-communist people were drug users, gay people, unemployed people. Like, they didn't even consider the possibility that somebody was just a psychopath. They immediately jumped into the conclusion that he could have been an addict or gay or unemployed. So it's a very interesting snippet of information if you are interested in social studies. This entire crime was barely, if at all, reported on in the media, and that's because the Communist Party had their full control over the media, and if they just did not want something to report it on, then it wasn't. And it was in the best interest of the Communist Party to keep people ignorant about psychopaths and possible dangers out there. It would make the Communist Party look bad and incompetent if the residents of a communist country were deranged like that. And this is by a bunch of crimes were not reported on at all, or inaccurately, or incompletely, and I still have hundreds of topics to discuss on my channel, so just imagine how much crime there was in communism and how much the government did not want to acknowledge that. And the last thing I wanted to mention for today is this photo. This is not digitally edited, it was not photoshopped by somebody on Tumblr. This is a method of identifying victims called photographic superimposition. They found Yolan's skull in the drawer under the rock in the forest, and they photographed the skull in the exact angle as this portrait was taken of Yolan. And then they imposed these two photos on top of each other, and you can see how perfectly the shape of the skull aligns with the shape of the face. And even though it's not exact science, it was good enough to just give further proof that this body indeed belonged to this young girl. So unfortunately, the doctor never got the punishment that he deserved because he killed himself, and therefore Yola never truly got the justice that she deserved. I'm very sorry for Anna, who lost her daughter, and in a strange way she also lost her husband, who she thought was a good and honest man, and then it turned out that he had an affair with her own daughter, and I don't know, I just feel very bad for how her life could have unfolded. And that is all that I can tell you about this case. I know that all of this information was presented so all over the place, but I just wanted to give everything chronologically so that you can organize the information in your head to make it make sense. And let me know what you thought of this case. Do you have anything that you want to add? Any questions? Do you know of a similar case? Oh, and by the way, let me know anything about yourself for the sake of my algorithm and engagement. Let me know which country you are from, what you do, what you like to do. Whatever you want, you can comment. I love responding to comments. That's my favorite thing. If you have watched all the way to the end, you might as well give me a like and a subscribe and share my channel with one person you think would like my kind of content. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you next time. Bye!